Okay.
I don't know if it's in, not sure which one. It's not in the sport. It may be a rule. Maybe a rule.
We're ready if you are.
Thank you. One of the things, that was an excellent presentation that Bart gave. In reference back to the live bait proclamation, if you don't know, if you haven't read it lately, we don't allow the sale of any crawfish in Tennessee, whether they're caught in the wild or whether they're brought in, the virile or the white or the rusty or the Kentucky river crayfish. So we've done it for, it was about 2 or 3 years, I think it's been in place. And I'm going to talk about that after the sport fish proposal, but let me get into that first. These proposals are not much different than what I previewed or showed you back at the August Commission meeting in Knoxville. We asked for comments from the public by news release, a couple news releases, and we only received about 17. And out of those, most of them were comments that related to something totally different from what we're proposing. But I'm going to go over, if any of the particular regulations I talk about, I'll mention how many comments we got on them, what they were. So here we go. Typically I'll start with a statewide, but I want to end with a statewide for the sport fish, so it'll sort of segue into the live bait proclamation because it has to do with crawfish. But in Region 1, Agency Lakes, Browns and Maples Creek Lakes, regarding crappie, currently there's a 10-inch length limit. After doing some age and growth analysis on the crappie from both those lakes, we determined that they were slower growing than they should be growing, and some of them in fact may not even get to 10 inches before they die of old age. So we want to allow the anglers the ability to be able to harvest some crappie from these lakes before they died out, I guess. And so we recommended to reduce that to 8 inches. The anglers should be fine with this, and this follows along with 3 other agency lakes that we've changed over the last couple of years: Whiteville Lake, Herb Parsons Lake, and Glen Springs Lake. This one is, we thought would be the most controversial regulation. It deals with sauger in Kentucky Reservoir, pretty much below Pickwick Dam is where that fishery exists. For years we've had a 14-inch length limit on sauger, and at least since the early 90s. And the statewide length limit on sauger is 15 inches, but it's been 14 for a long, long time. And we've noticed a decline in the sauger harvest or the sauger fishery below Pickwick into Kentucky Reservoir over the last several years. Been concerned about it for a number of years and tried several different things like stocking more sauger for the last few years. But it's gotten to the point where we feel like we're going to have to do something a little more drastic. And in looking at this sauger female maturity index, the 14-inch regulation only protects about 14% of the spawning females. And a 15-inch regulation would protect over twice as many, or 31%. So with that in mind, we're going to recommend to increase the size limit of sauger from 14 to 15 inches, which keeps it in line with the statewide regulation and as well protects more spawning females. We're going to keep the creel limit at 10 fish. We're not going to make any changes there. By the way, we looked at the possibility of reducing the creel of sauger below Pickwick to see if that would have an impact, and we'd have to reduce it down to about 3 fish to make an impact, to where we could see it would actually save fish for other people to catch. 7 fish would not matter. Even 5 fish reduction would not really make that much difference as far as the percent that they would save. So we're not going to recommend changing the creel limit, but the length limit is what we feel like would be a better option for us to go to. And since sauger is a meat fishery, people would just not come to fish there if it was a limit of 3. So we're also going to, our intent is to try to stock as many sauger as we can, anywhere from 150,000 to 200,000 We'll try to achieve that goal. We've gotten better at Humboldt Hatchery over the last couple of years in producing sauger, and they're learning, and they've done pretty well. This past year they did really well, and we hope to improve that every year. It just depends on where we can get our brood fish and the survivability of the fry to stocking size, which is about 1.5 inches. In Region 2, in Montgomery Bell State Park, they have a couple lakes, but the biggest one is called Woodhaven Lake. And about 20 years ago, they had a problem with overcrowded. Well, they had too many common carp in the lake, and so they drained the lake, or at least lowered it and treated it for the carp, and they decided to restock it with Florida bass. And what they wanted to do was to protect those Florida bass for a while, so that they wouldn't be caught out of there too soon. So they had a no harvest regulation on bass in Woodhaven Lake. And after reviewing some of the stuff they have on their webpage and consulting with them about this regulation, we're recommending to change the regulation to a statewide regulation, which is basically no length limit, but a creel of 5 per day. This will allow the anglers to catch some of the smaller ones even, and to harvest some, which would probably improve the length frequency of the largemouth bass in that lake as well.
Bobby,
Yes, question.
is that lake from boat motors, or is it just electric motors and not?
Is it trolling motors only?
Trolling motors, yeah, is that one trolling motors only? Does
I'm
anybody know?
not sure. It may be.
Okay.
They do have access to it with boats, but I don't know if it's a no-wake regulation or it's a trolling motors. I'm not really sure. It's a state park lake. It's not one of our lakes. I'll try to find out and let you know. Okay, in Region 3, we'll talk about muskie. In particular, we're going to talk about muskie in the Collins River area up on the plateau. This is a fishery that has developed over the last 10 or 15 years or so, and it's really gotten popular. We've stocked it in the past with muskie to try to increase the population, and this particular fish here was a 52-inch muskie that was caught in the Collins River back about 2 years ago. And so we're going to focus on the Caney Fork and the Collins River watershed, as you can see where it's located in that part of the state. But bring it up into a larger view. What we're talking about is the Great Falls Lake, the waters that lead into it, which are the Calfkiller River, the Caney Fork River, and the Collins River, and even the Rocky River. And as well, we're going to talk about the upper end of Center Hill Reservoir too, because some of these muskie have spilled over into the Center Hill Reservoir as well. And looking at research with Tennessee Tech, as well as some of the stuff that we've done, the female muskie generally spawn at about 44 inches long. Currently, we have a 36-inch length limit, so we're really not protecting many of the females at 36 inches. So we know that at least 44 they will spawn. We've also tracked them to find out some that we stocked, what the fate of those is. Are they contributing to the fishery? It turns out that the ones we're stocking are getting gobbled up by great blue herons and otters for the most part. So they have contributed in the past, but and some of them make it. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of them get eaten up. But the other objective, or one of the other objectives we want to find out, is if they are reproducing in there. We see evidence that they were, but we haven't really been able to document it. And we did find out that they are reproducing. So they're wild muskie reproducing, and those are the ones that are making it and contributing to the fishery. So what we want to do is protect the females a little longer, and we have a regulation already in place on Dale Hollow Lake and Melton Hill Lake that is a 50-inch length limit. So like I said, we have a 36-inch length limit now, and we want we're proposing to increase that to a 50-inch length limit. It's a big fish, but it will protect the females, allow them a couple times to spawn. The anglers in the area that fish it are in favor of it. It's become a real destination fishery. People from up north come down and fish, especially in the wintertime when their waters freeze up north. Of course, this never freezes up, and the fishing is just as good in January and February probably as it is in other times of the year. So Sport fish comments, I think we got 7. This was the most for any particular regulation that we had. We had 7, and I believe 6 of the recommendations were in favor of going forward with this. We did have one that was against it, so we'll go forth from here. The Polk County streams, currently in Big Lost Creek and Goforth Creek and Spring Creeks, we have a regulation that is closed to fishing on all Fridays from March the 1st to July 1st, and a single hook only and daylight hours only. And this is because we stock these creeks on Fridays during this time, and in order to allow for a better distribution of the fish to other fishermen who can't get there on a Friday, maybe they come up camp for the weekend or something. That's why we elected to close it on Fridays, because they would sit there right when the trucks dump the fish in and harvest them right away. So we have this regulation in place for that, and we wanted to add another. Well, first of all, we want to reduce that end of that closed season or session from March 1 to June 1, because we don't stock we don't stock in July anymore anyway. So we're going to protect them. We're going to change that to March 1 to June 1, and we're going to add another creek called Greasy Creek. And we have, I believe, approval by the Polk County Commission to go forward with this, as well as support from the wildlife officers and our own biologists for this particular regulation. So we're adding Greasy Creek. Now, back in August, I think there were 2 other creeks that we had included on there, and we have dropped those from this regulation proposal at this time. We may do it another time, but for this year, we're not going to include those. So in Region 4 at Chilhowie and Fort Loud, Melton Hill, currently we have it's a combination walleye sauger regulation where 15-inch and a creel limit of 10. And we are recommending to change that back to the statewide regulation. That's where walleye have to be 16 inches, creel limit of 5, and sauger, as I mentioned earlier, 15-inch with a creel limit of 10. And part of that has to do with some boundary issues, like in Fort Loudon, in the very upper end of it, it goes back to statewide regulation, and it's just a little difficulty for some of the anglers and confusion for them to figure out where that mark is. So we electing to change this back to just a regular statewide regulation on walleye and sauger in those lakes. And then in the upper end of Cherokee Reservoir, there is a special paddlefish snagging season. It goes from March 1 to March 15th. And the reason it's a little bit earlier in the year is because in the past, the John Sevier plant, the hydropower plant, generated, it was a steam plant, and they released a lot of warm water discharge, which attracted the paddlefish up into that area earlier in the year than they normally would go. Well, they've since changed that. It's no longer going to have a warm water discharge, and they're not using it, and I think they're going to convert it over to gas, and if they do, they still won't have a warm water discharge. So the paddlefish, in fact, they've already started. The paddlefish don't get really up into that area until later in the year when Mother Nature warms it up. And so we're proposing to change that from March 1 to 15th to April 1 to 15th. And this is really just a housekeeping regulation. It's just to identify the entrance gate from where it was to basically say the Rocky Fork Road and the State Park entrance in Greene and Unicoi counties. Those are all the regional recommendations. I want to go to the statewide, as I mentioned earlier. And as Bart talked about, crayfish, currently you can catch them for bait. We have the live bait proclamation, but there was some question amongst some of the enforcement folks as to whether they could catch them and eat them. They can catch them for bait, but there was nothing that said they could catch them for consumption. So we wanted to spell it out in our regulation, our sport fish regulation. So we did, and we actually created a new section in our sport fish proclamation, and to say that it is legal to harvest for consumption, and we liberalized the methods. In the bait fish proclamation, we had that you could only use a dip net and hand pick, and there's several different regulations. I won't go into them, but in the process of going over that, we realized there were other methods of collecting crawfish for either for bait or for consumption. And so we finally, just to make things simple, we just said it was legal to use for every method except electrofishing. I can't remember the other two. Explosives and chemicals. Yes, thank you very much. So in doing that, we also are going to have to make some changes in live bait proclamation. So I'm going to stop here because this is the end of the sport fish regulations, and y'all might want to discuss that and go forward as a committee, and then we'll go into the live bait proclamation after this.
Is that all 1313?
That's all.
Questions of the committee? Commission? Audience? I'd entertain a motion from the committee.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, any discussion? On the Fisheries Committee, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned, when we were looking through particularly the methods for consumption of crawfish in the sport fish proclamation, we realized we have to make that same change in the live bait proclamation, as well as when we went through there, we saw some other things that need to be changed that over the last couple of years we just haven't opened up for whatever reason, and we wanted to make those changes since we're going to open up anyway. So in addition to the liberalize the methods, we also, in the proclamation, it allows for the harvest and use, not the harvest, but the use of the dusky salamanders, and it mentions in there the species, scientific name, but we wanted to add that they are the northern and the spotted dusky. It turns out there's about 7 dusky salamander species in Tennessee that I didn't even know until I started looking this up. So basically that's all the changes we have, I think, is to make those changes that you've seen in the strike through in your packet, adding just specifying northern and spotted dusky and liberalizing the methods for the crayfish for harvest, and then a few other housekeeping details that are in there. That's proclamation, live bait proclamation is 1315.
Questions or comments from the committee or the commission? Audience? I'd entertain a motion.
Move that we adopt live bait proclamation 13-15.
Second.
Motion second, any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Cox. I guess the fact you only got 17 comments or requests from the public means we must have things in pretty good shape with our fisheries, and it's not always been that way in October, so it's nice that we had a smooth transition. So all I can say is good job. It's a good job of the Fisheries Department. I think it'd be good if we take about a 10-minute break before we move on with wildlife, if that's okay. We'll meet back in about 10 minutes.